Chair and members of the committee, thank you for having us here today. And much like Anthony said, Mikey, Anthony, Brandon, Tyree just have done such a great job articulating their points and my prepared statements. I feel I'd just be reiterating some of the same things that have been said. So with that, I'd like it to be, like we discussed, a little more conversational. So again, my name is Adam Tschour. I'm the Director of Athletics at the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. Been with the Tigers and the university for almost 3 years now. And I felt it was important to provide an institutional point of view with regards to these topics. And again, very much overarching in agreement with everything that's said here. But in that conversational nature, just kind of share a little bit of my background in terms of why I do what we do and why most of my peers do what we do. I myself was a student athlete. I was a golfer. I played at Creighton University. And by my senior year, I was burnt out. I really didn't want to play anymore. I was ready to just find the best paying job I could. Worked in private corporate America for a couple years. And after a couple years of doing that, grew pretty bored and not happy with my life, and found that what I was missing was being back on campus, being around competition, and what I feel is one of the penultimate systems of education, and that's the Division I student athlete experience, a true co-curricular experience, and being around that. And so I left a really good paying job to be a grad assistant making $685 a month, did that for a couple years, and rest is history. Ball State University, University of Dayton, and now the University of the Pacific. And I think it's important to note that foundationally, because I do think that it is worth noting that, and I believe Anthony used the word Wild West earlier when we were meeting, and that's an absolutely great phrase for it. Our world right now is absolute chaos. I think it's a vestige of an old system mixing with the courts, which have been pretty traumatic in terms of our world as we know it. And I'll disagree with maybe one thing that Brandon had said earlier, in that these court cases, whether it's NCAA versus Fontenot, House, Johnson, Alston, O'Bannon, all these court cases, they were brought on, those names, who are those people? They were student athletes. There's either student athletes or former student athletes that were suing for additional rights. And by and large, they have won landslide victories in those cases because, yes, the system needed to change. And I feel of 366 Division I institutions out there, most of my peers would agree that systemic failure at a very high level of institutions not willing to change with the times. And I'll go back to my personal favorite example. It was an athlete named Jeremy Bloom. Jeremy Bloom was a Olympic mogul downhill skier. He was a male model on Wheaties boxes. I mean, talk about name, image, and likeness. He was the poster child of somebody who could have earned a vast amount of money, but was prevented to because he was also a punt returner at Colorado. Not allowed to. That was a transformative time that institutions could say, hey, you know what? Institutions should allow this young man to go out and earn a living based on this. This has nothing to do with us and his student athlete experience. And they did not do that. The NCAA should have been and ought to have been more of a leader on transfer opportunities, that when, say, for instance, a coach leaves, whether they're fired or depart on their own, that should open the door for a student athlete to be able to look for a new opportunity, that decision that they made to go to that institution, that coach was an important factor in their decision, and them not being there might lead to change. No, you can't change. You can't transfer, or at least you have to sit out a year. And they buckled on that. They did not. And so what led to getting to a fever pitch of court cases that have led to, yes, a tremendous amount of freedom. It is a seller's market in favor of the student athlete right now in terms of their abilities to call their own shots on a great number of things. And that has led to, yes, in many cases, some predatory activity that has harmed a great number of young men and women out there. With that, I do feel that there is opportunity out there for the state. The state has been a leader in this space for a long time. The difficulty from an institutional standpoint is that we all compete on a national landscape. And there are a lot of legislatures out there that are weaponizing their own states to put their state in front of other states purely from a recruitment standpoint. So I'll use like Arkansas, for instance, passed a bill recently where they will not tax student athletes in their state. They will not tax, from a state income tax standpoint, they will not tax their NIL or their rev share payments. And now it's becoming increasingly clear that this comes up often when we're talking to agents. Another thing I'll also say is, in this day and age, I've gone through 42 basketball players in 3 years on our men's basketball roster. We have had wholesale turnover of our roster. But University of the Pacific, we like to think of ourselves as a thought leader, an institution of change in this space. We are not an A4 power conference institution. We do not have $1 million coaches and $100 million football programs. We do opt in. We are one of most Division I schools, all but I think at 30 or so. There was only one university in the state, University of California, Davis, that did not opt in last year to additional House benefits, but they have already announced that they will opt into it this upcoming year. This gives you the ability to pay athletes directly. This gives you the ability to give additional scholarships beyond the old scholarship caps that we used to have. Once you opt in, you have to abide by a number of different rules that came from the House settlement. But that being said, when we enter into conversations, and why we are a little different, because unless you spend up to the House settlement limit, collectives really don't exist in our world. It's only if you spend up to that limit do third-party collectives come in, because that is exempt spending from the cap. That exists beyond it. So Cal, absolutely. Stanford, absolutely. San Diego State, yes, I'm probably sure that they do. Schools like us, or probably University of San Diego or University of California, San Diego, where you're at, do not deal in third-party NIL deals. And it also puts universities in a difficult situation where it is hard for us as institutions to provide financial feedback from a liability standpoint to young men and women, that if we're wrong and we give them the wrong advice, there's a liability for our institutions that could come from that. That being said, we do try and have always been proponents of what coined phrase in our world is student-athlete development. This is something that is back to when I was an athlete. They called them Champs Life Skills Seminars. And I remember getting career preparedness training from Wells Fargo. They even hired a couple of my teammates eventually. The traditional don't bet on it gambling education that we would get. A lot of universities, including ours, have tried to pivot this into financial literacy, into things like educating them on what their rights are as student athletes in terms of, yes, according to the Student Athlete Bill of Rights that was passed not too long ago, you do have the ability to retain your scholarship. You do have rights that you can force upon the university if you find yourself in a bad situation. Beyond that, there are mechanisms. So, for instance, the tool that we use with a company called Teamworks, which is what we use to pay our athletes, the default setting on this actually sets 30% of their money aside for taxes. Now, because we as an institution, the liability I just mentioned, do not have necessarily the ability to give them financial advice, they can go in themselves and turn it off, which about 4% of our athletes have. Not against our advice. They've turned that off. But 96% of our athletes do have that feature enabled. And there's also other mechanisms for financial literacy. I wholesale agree that there should be more financial literacy resources out there for students, whether they're mandatory or just provided by the state. I think that would be a tremendous advantage for California institutions in terms of a value proposition of why their representation should take seriously sending their young men and women, their clients, to compete in California. The hardest thing, and I think the most predatory thing from my seat that I've seen, is their representation. And I have every basketball player of those 42 I mentioned, many of whom we've tried to retain, unfortunately, to no avail. And God bless them. I don't wish them any ill. Make better lives for themselves. But the agents themselves, every one of them I've not dealt with them. We've dealt with their agents. They all have representation by somebody. In some cases, they're high quality people. They're attorneys. They're probably professional agents, or at least with professional agencies. There's some mechanism that I have that I can use if they try to do something untoward. And there have been some doozies. I've had agents tell me, "Well, I won't send my client to play for you guys unless you sign my other client." Which to me, that seems like fraud, because that client has nothing to do with this client. I've had agents say, "No, you need to pay me directly, because I don't want my guy knowing what I'm taking," because they're taking 10, 20, 30%, which professional leagues, because there is collective bargaining, they have caps, 3, 4, 5%. There's no caps. There's no regulation in our space right now. So with that, it's there are some obscene, contracts and relationships out there. The difficulty for the institutions is they've gotten their hooks in them well before they ever cross our campuses. These are people we deal with from day one. What can the state do? There actually is already a state law on the books around the conduct of sports agents. The Miller, I had it written down here. See if I can find it. The Miller-Ayala Acox Sports Agent Act of 1996. It regulates now the conduct of agents in the professional space. They have to register with the Secretary of State. They have to pay a $100 filing fee. They have to do a criminal background check. They have to show that they have a certain minimum coverage, liability coverage available to them. This could easily be adapted to our space. And it is a mechanism that I think would be a nice tool for us to have. But again, the issue with, and why I think the ultimate thing that states need to do is become a passionate advocate for a national solution. Because what will happen with most of the laws, and I think Brandon actually hinted at this earlier in his testimony, if we put laws or regulations into place that maybe are student athlete beneficial, all that's really going to happen is those agents who, again, already have their hooks in those kids are just going to steer their clients away from the state of California, because the other 49 states are going to do their own thing. There is such value in what we do in college sports. If you look at what the Tigers mean to our community, what a successful competitive sports program can do for a community, what the Flyers meant to Dayton, Ohio when I was there, Gonzaga and our own conference, now the Pac-12, but I've been a lifelong WCC member. I've been up to Spokane a number of times. It's a nice city. Not a lot of great things going on up there. That being said, brand new glitzy convention center, doubling the size of their airport. If you grab any civic leader in Spokane, they'll tell you it's because of the Zags and 27 straight men's basketball tournament appearances. College athletics can have a transformative effect on community. And I want to make sure that California is getting the best and the brightest out there, not just in our classrooms, but on the court. So I do feel that it needs to be taken with some thought to ensure that we are still the penultimate place for student athletes to want to come and compete. But that being said, the ability for us to be able to somehow collectively bargain with athletes to find ourselves in a position to where we have, as a benefit, amazing financial literacy opportunities, maybe even things like a collective pension that student athletes can voluntarily, electively put money into and pool their monies together for greater returns for their future and their family's future. I think there's a ton of great ideas that the state of California can activate.